Imagine for a moment stepping into the shoes of those who came before us. Welcome to a journey that transforms history into vibrant stories that captivate and inspire. You're not a knight. You're not a monk. You definitely aren't the lord of any manor. No, you've been chosen, perhaps more accurately cornered into becoming something far less glamorous and far more expendable, a medieval assassin. No herald will sing for you. No statue will bear your likeness. Your name, if it's remembered at all, will be spat like a curse or whispered in dread. Sounds thrilling, doesn't it? Picture it now, the cold bite of iron on your waist, the smell of damp leather under your cloak, the low rumble of chatter in a crowded alehouse as your eyes scan for a mark you've never met. Somewhere nearby, a man who once insulted the bishop is enjoying his last warm meal. You're the reason why. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, post your location and local time. I'm always curious to see where you're listening from, especially if you're curled up under medieval thick blankets. Wherever you are, I hope tonight brings you rest, comfort, and maybe a curious dream or two. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your story begins not with power, but poverty. You're one of the forgotten many, no land, no title, and just enough family to miss, but not enough to rescue you from obscurity. Maybe your father owed too many debts. Maybe your mother whispered secrets to the wrong priest. Either way, your path has been narrowed until the only choices left are starvation, our service. And service in this case means following a hooded man with a voice like gravel into a back alley where you're told to kneel. No ceremony, no blessing, just a knife to your shoulder as a crude test of your pain threshold. Welcome to the shadows. It turns out there is no assassin academy, no Hogwarts for hired blades. You're given no letter by owl, just a burlap sack, a coin purse filled with less than you'd need to rent a chicken coop, and the kind of advice that includes phrases like aim low, most men don't wear codpiece armor, and never trust a noble. The first lesson: you're not a soldier. Soldiers wear bright colors and die in rows. You're a smear in the margins. A footnote to history: you don't fight, you finish. But it's not all doom and stabbing. Sometimes you get soup. Very watery soup. With exactly 3 lentils and a piece of boiled onions, so floppy it gives up trying to float. And on feast days, a chunk of black bread so tough you could file a blade with it. Your sleeping arrangements are no better. You share a corner of a barn with 2 other recruits, one who snores like a haunted goat, and one who mutters the same name over and over in his sleep. You try not to ask questions. You try not to dream at all. Your days are filled with silence, no chit-chat. No how was your day. Unless your day involved eavesdropping, tailing, or learning to mimic a drunk peasant with convincing accuracy. Which, oddly, is harder than it sounds. There's an art to slurring just enough to pass unnoticed, but not so much that someone picks a fight. And then there's the waiting. So much waiting. Hours crouched behind crumbling stone walls or stuffed in the hollow of a tree like a squirrel with social anxiety. Waiting for someone who may never come, for a signal that might not arrive, or for a pigeon to land on your head and ruin your one good hood. There's a common myth that assassins are always moving, always killing. In truth, most of your time is spent doing the medieval equivalent of refreshing a web page over and over, just to see if your next order has arrived. Sometimes you get a message written in code naturally, usually hidden inside a fake sausage or pinned behind a loose brick in the privy of a local inn. You become intimately familiar with every weird smell a castle kitchen can produce. And yes, sometimes the message is simply, wait. Historians still argue whether organized bands of assassins, truly existed outside of a few notorious groups like the Hashashin of the Middle East. But in your tiny corner of Christendom, the work is real enough, and it stinks, quite literally, because the scent of your world is mostly sweat mildew and the ever-present tang of fear. Quirky detail number one. You're not paid in coins alone, sometimes as favors, a safe passage, a pouch of healing herbs. Once you're even paid with a goat, you name it lunch escapes, you mourn appropriately. Quirky detail number two, you're taught to eat with your non-dominant hand. Why? So your sword hand is always ready. Of course, this makes you look suspiciously clumsy when invited to dinner, which you rarely are because no one invites the guy in the corner who smells faintly of death and disappointment. You don't live with purpose. You live with paranoia. Every stranger is a spy. Every window might have eyes, and every dog might bark at the wrong time, drawing attention you can't afford. The worst part, you're not even cool. There's no flowing cape, no hidden wrist blade, no theatrical rooftop leaps. You tried jumping from a stable roof once. You sprained your ankle and ruined 3 months of planning. Even your kills are messy. There's no clean strike or elegant silence. One time you miss your mark entirely and stab his cousin instead. You improvise a second stabbing and leave a cryptic mark to confuse the guards. They blame the butcher. You feel guilty for a week, and yet, somehow, you keep going. Maybe it's the faint hope of a better life. Maybe it's the thought that your name whispered, though it maybe still has weight. Or maybe it's because the only other option is returning to the village where your uncle still thinks you're a wool merchant. Either way, this is your life now. You are the whisper in the hallway, the shadow behind the torchlight, the reason some barons sleep with a dagger under their pillow. You probably won't survive this. You wake before the sun, if you slept at all. The barn smells like a compost heap in denial, and your back is sore from the wooden beam you mistook for a pillow. But there's no time to complain. The man with the gravel voice, who may or may not be named Osric, no one knows for sure, kicks over a bucket as your wake-up call. And so your training begins. Training in this case does not involve sleek obstacle courses or smooth weapon drills. There's no montage, no music. Just pain mud and the occasional bite from a feral goose you weren't expecting to share a training field with. You trudge behind Osric into the forest where the lesson for today is something called walking silently. This sounds simple. It is not. Every snapped twig, every rustling leaf earns you a slap on the back of your head and a grunt that sounds vaguely like disappointment. You try to shift your weight properly, stepping toe to heel, but then a squirrel screeches overhead and you flinch so hard you nearly fall into a bramble bush. The goal is to move like the wind. Right now, you move more like a drunk windmill. But you're not alone. Beside you is a recruit called Elric, whose greatest skill so far seems to be whining. He's already tripped 3 times and once tried to sneak a nap behind a tree stump. Osric saw through it instantly, mainly because Elric snored like a drowning duck. You reach the clearing where weapons training begins, except there are no weapons. You're handed a stick. A forked stick. Supposedly this is to teach adaptability. In practice, it teaches splinters. You're told to attack a straw dummy that someone has lovingly painted with a smiley face. You hesitate just for a moment, because the dummy looks weirdly like your uncle. But Ostrich shouts, and you lunge and your stick promptly snaps in two. Everyone laughs, except the dummy. He's seen worse. One of the stranger exercises involves rolling down a hill while holding your breath. You're told this simulates escape under duress. What it actually simulates is vomiting under pressure. You don't know why this hill is always wet. You also don't want to ask. Quirky detail number 1. You're required to learn the calls of local birds not for bird watching, but for coded communication. Need a distraction? That's a magpie trill, target sighted. Robin chirp, time to flee. The distressed call of the northern grebe. The problem, no one in your group has actually seen a northern grebe. Quirky detail number 2. You have to master climbing trees, not graceful monkey-style climbing. No, this is more the kind where you hug the trunk like it owes you money and pray your jerkin doesn't tear. It usually does, and bark gets everywhere. There's an archery segment too, sort of. You're given a bow that looks like it was built during a famine, and 2 arrows fletched with what may be rat fur. The targets are hollow gourds hanging from a branch. You miss all of them. Elric hits a tree. Osric sighs so hard it knocks over a bucket 10 feet away. As evening approaches, you're told to track someone through the woods. You're not told who, just that they left an hour ago. This is meant to hone your observation. You spend the next 2 hours following what turns out to be a deer. The good news. You found it. The bad news. It found you first and kicked you in the shin. Historians still argue whether formal training camps for assassins existed in medieval Europe, or whether lone killers picked up skills through mercenary work and banditry. What is certain, surviving long enough to learn anything took either unnatural talent or wildly dumb luck. Back at the barn, Osric gives you the day's rations. A chunk of smoked something that might have once been meat. It's chewy. You're not sure if that's a good sign. Elric claims his piece blinked. You eat anyway. You're handed a wax-sealed scroll with your next task to spy on the local reeve and report how many guards he employs. A simple job, but you're told to complete it dressed as a stable boy, which means learning to convincingly shovel horse droppings while memorizing guard rotations. You do both somehow. Your boots, however, will never recover. The next day includes dagger drills. You finally receive a real blade dulled at the tip and missing one side of its hilt. You're taught where to aim neck under the armpit base of the spine, places that armor rarely covers. You practice on more strawmen, one of which Elric accidentally sets on fire by placing it too close to a lantern. Osric says nothing. He just walks away muttering something about finding a proper job tanning hides. You begin to notice the mental toll. You flinch at sudden movements. You eat in silence. You listen to conversations not meant for you, just in case one day you need to repeat them. Trust becomes a thing of the past. You even start hiding your food, not because anyone's stealing it, but because it feels safer that way. One strange evening, you're woken at midnight and told to shadow a real assassin on a mission. His name is Marek, and he doesn't speak. You follow as he slips through alleys, climbs over walls, and enters a manor house through a second-story window. You wait, heart pounding. 10 minutes later, he returns, blood on his glove, no expression. You walk back in silence. He never says a word. That's the moment you realize this job doesn't reward noise flare or recognition. It rewards those who can endure, who can vanish when needed, who can watch life from behind a curtain and never wish to join it. There's no badge, no title, no gold-plated invitation to the Assassin's Guild Ball. Just the slow transformation of your body into a tool, your thoughts into patterns, and your instincts into a kind of whispering darkness. And still there are moments of absurdity, like when you're taught to fight blindfolded by having chickens tied to your ankles to train your balance, or when a local farmer stumbles upon your group and mistakes it for a traveling theater troupe performing a very intense version of Hamlet. You never correct him. By the end of the week, you feel different. Not better, just different. You move a little quieter. You sleep with a dagger under your blanket. You start noticing which roofs are climbable and which alleys end in traps. You can tell the difference between the footfall of a guard and that of a washerwoman without turning your head. You are not ready, but you are ready enough. So now you know how to walk without a sound stab without hesitation and impersonate a stable boy while memorizing troop rotations. Congratulations, you're officially employable. But who exactly hires a medieval assassin? Well, here's where things get odd. There's a popular idea that kings and lords were constantly whispering from behind velvet curtains, hiring secret killers to deal with rivals. And yes, that happens sometimes. But just as often, your contracts come from people you'd never expect. Bakers, bishops, a very angry widow who insists her husband accidentally slipped down the stairs 6 months too late. The going rate depends on a few things: location difficulty and who the target is. A disgraced knight in a tavern. That's a low-fee job. A nobleman surrounded by guards in a moat full of swans. That'll cost extra, especially if the swans are aggressive. Which they always are. Swans do not mess around. Your first real contract arrives not by messenger, but via a sack of grain. Tucked inside is a waxed scroll with a crude drawing of a man, 3 red marks, and the name Bryce. No last name, no address. Just a note that says, "He meets the abbot on Thursdays. Handle it quietly." Bryce, it turns out, is the local tax collector. Unpopular, frequently drunk, and currently nursing a swollen ankle from falling off his horse while counting coins. You track him for 2 days pretending to be a novice monk sweeping the priory steps. No one notices. You're very good at being invisible by now. But just before the job, something strange happens. The local priest recognizes you. Not by name, but by the way you walk. You don't move like a monk, he says, eyes narrowed. You mumble something about bad knees and shuffle away. Quirky detail number 1. Some contracts are phrased in riddles. One scroll simply said, "When the bells toll 6, the fox must sleep." You spent 3 days looking for a literal fox before realizing fox was the nickname of a particularly greasy merchant with a habit of stealing from church coffers. Quirky detail number 2. Payment is rarely upfront. Most clients prefer to see the results first. This leads to an uncomfortable moment when you return to your contact. Quietly state it's done and are met with wide-eyed panic and the phrase, "Wait, what's done?" To make matters worse, not all jobs involve killing. Some are tests. Steal a ring from a noble's finger during a feast. Deliver a poisoned letter without touching the wax seal. Replace a page in a holy book with a forgery so precise even the monks don't notice. You're not just a murderer. You're an inconvenience with legs. And yet your work is in demand. There's always someone looking to settle a grudge, silence a rival, or erase a mistake. The local abbot, for instance, once hired someone like you to retrieve a certain compromising letter from a barmaid in town. Retrieve in this case meant burn the tavern down. You fortunately aren't that dramatic. Historians still argue whether assassins were truly freelancers or part of broader political machinery, especially when it came to church politics. Some records hint that certain monasteries harbored trained killers, men who prayed by day and poisoned by night. Others say that's romantic nonsense. But the fact remains, people who weren't supposed to kill sometimes did. One day you're summoned by a friar. He's old, bald, and smells faintly of cinnamon, and something much less pleasant. He offers you a job: make a man disappear. Not kill him. Just erase him. It's a strange request, but you're curious. Turns out the man in question is a rival cleric who's been spreading dangerous ideas like translating the Bible into the common tongue. You don't kill him. You convince him to flee after staging an ominous visit from someone in a plague doctor mask and a handful of chicken bones. It's all very theatrical. He's gone by morning. You're paid with a silver ring and a mule. The ring is useful, the mule is not. It walks into a pond and refuses to leave for 2 days. You eventually sell it to a miller who names it Judgment. Sometimes nobles hire you, but not directly. Always through a servant or a steward or a distant cousin with a wandering eye and a purse full of bribe money. One such contract involves a viscount who suspects his younger brother of plotting against him. Your job plant a forged letter suggesting he's the one planning the betrayal. Very Shakespearean. You're paid in wine. It's terrible wine, but it's payment. And then there are the clergy. Oh yes, the clergy. The church officially condemns all forms of murder, especially the stealthy behind the altar sort. But unofficially, that's where it gets murky. A certain bishop once paid an assassin to ensure a relic remained in his cathedral, and not mysteriously transferred to a rival abbey. How by arranging a little accident for the caravan transporting it? You hear the story from a one-eyed assassin named Tybalt. He once posed as a relic inspector. His disguise consisted entirely of a robe 2 sizes too big and a staff with a squirrel carved on top. No one questioned him. Not all clients are powerful. Sometimes it's just people who are desperate. A mother whose daughter vanished with a traveling bard? A potter whose debts are being collected with fist, not parchment. You start to notice a pattern. The world is full of quiet vengeance, and you are its courier. Of course, some clients lie, like the man who claims his neighbor is a spy for the Danes. You stalk the poor fellow for a week only to discover he's just really into Norse poetry and wears suspiciously pointy shoes. You refuse the job. The client tries to attack you with a fish. It doesn't go well. Eventually, you learn to ask the right questions. Is the target armed, protected, innocent? You don't always care, but you need to know. Because even a simple job can spiral into a night-long chase through alleyways or a duel in a bakery involving 3 rolling pins and a wheel of cheese. One final lesson: never take a job you wouldn't be willing to finish twice, because sometimes the first time doesn't stick. You once buried a man alive after a fatal stab wound, only to see him staggering around the market 2 days later yelling about turnips. You finished the job, quietly, near the apples. By now you've started building a reputation. Nothing official, just whispers. A certain look you get in your eyes. The way you never walk with your back exposed, and the fact that tavern keepers always seem to offer you a seat with the view of the door. You're not famous, but you are feared. Which is better? Fame gets you noticed. Fear gets you fed. You've probably dreamed of carrying a curved dagger, its hilt wrapped in silk, perhaps engraved with a snake or something equally theatrical. Maybe you pictured slipping it silently into a villain's ribs under moonlight while wearing a hood that billows dramatically in the wind. But reality gives you a spoon. Okay, not always a spoon, but that's the kind of improvisation you're expected to master. Because in truth, medieval assassins rarely walked around with glittering weapons tucked under their cloaks. Carrying a dagger or sword openly, especially in towns and cities, was an invitation to be stopped by the guards, searched by paranoid lords, or mistaken for a common thug and tossed into the nearest dungeon, so you had to get creative. The first time you're asked to perform with no weapon at all, you're handed a cobbler's hammer, a sack of flour, and told your target prefers to bathe after dinner. You ask how the flour fits in. The answer: that's the fun part. It turns out if you throw a cloud of flour into someone's face mid-bath, they can't see a thing and they absolutely panic. You don't even need to kill them half the time, just convince them the devil's arrived. Your target slips, knocks his head on the basin, and you leave without a scratch. Technically a win. Spiritually deeply confusing. Quirky detail number one. One assassin carried a sharpened shepherd's crook disguised as a walking stick. His nickname was the Hook. He also used it to steal pastries from windows. Multitasking. Quirky detail number two. Hairpins. Long, sharp, and entirely innocent looking. Women in the trade use them with terrifying efficiency. One even hollowed out the pin to carry poison. She once eliminated a merchant by adjusting her veil and brushing past him. The merchant thought he'd been stung by a bee. He died 3 hours later. The point is, discretion wasn't optional, it was survival. You once saw a fellow agent arrested for wearing a blade openly in a church square. The poor fool insisted it was for cutting bread. The guards didn't buy it. He was last seen arguing with the priest about absolution and then vanished into the back of a cart filled with fish. So you learn to use what's at hand. A candle holder becomes a club. A tankard lid becomes a blunt blade. In one notorious instance, you hear about an assassin who used a lute string to strangle his mark during a performance. Historians still argue whether the death ballad he played was improvised or pre-written. Some say it was a love song, and it's not just weapons. You become a master of tools as tools. A kitchen ladle can scold as well as scoop. A broom handle broken just right becomes a spear. One time you infiltrate a dinner party disguised as a servant and take down a guard using nothing but a wine cork and a walnut. Don't ask. It was a very weird evening. You're also trained in distractions. Your instructors used to call it the art of the goat. That's because in one memorable training exercise, a goat was released into the mess hall at the exact moment someone slipped out unseen. It worked perfectly. Everyone focused on the goat. You remember thinking, I want to be the goat. Not literally, just in principle. Sometimes, though, you do get a proper weapon. Once you're gifted a stiletto slender, perfect for slipping between ribs. You name it, mercy. Mercy goes missing 2 weeks later when you trip over a fishmonger's stall and accidentally drop it into a pile of eels. You spend the rest of the day digging through slippery, angry seafood to recover it. You do. Barely. But mercy isn't always welcome. In some households, guests are frisked rudely and thoroughly. So you resort to disguise. You've posed as a priest, a gardener, even a tooth puller once. That one involved an unfortunate misunderstanding where you were actually asked to remove a tooth. You did it. Badly. The man paid you in mead and silence. Another time your weapon is a length of silk cord and a plum tart. The tart is meant as a peace offering. The cord, well, and let's just say the Count's taster didn't notice anything odd, but the Count himself never made it to dessert. Plum tarts are forever ruined for you after that. But perhaps your most humiliating tool of death. A pair of sewing scissors. Small, sharp, and shaped like a bird. You're tasked with eliminating a tailor who's been quietly laundering messages for a rebel group. You sneak into his shop after hours only to find he's still awake sewing in his underclothes and singing a song about goats. You panic. You reach for the nearest sharp object. The bird scissors do the job, albeit awkwardly. The song ends mid-note. You leave shaken and with an unreasonable fear of embroidery kits. The fact is, the more you look like someone who shouldn't be dangerous, the more dangerous you become. A butcher with a cleaver suspicious. A laundress with a basket invisible. So the guild, or whatever loose collection of killers you're associated with, emphasizes this blend. Improvise. Use what's available. Use what's Historians still debate whether medieval assassins used disguised weapons as standard practice, or if most of these accounts are more folklore than fact. But they agree on one thing. Medieval urban centers were so densely packed, so chaotic, that killing someone quietly required more than muscle. It required nerve and a strange comfort with vegetables as weapons. Which brings us to vegetables. You once read about an assassin who used a turnip stuffed with stones to bludgeon a guard? You try it once, it works. Poorly. The turnip splits. The guard laughs. You throw it at him and run. The job fails, but you gain a new respect for produce. You also become adept at timing. A blade is just metal. But in the right moment, when a crowd cheers, when bells ring, when carts rattle down cobbled streets, it becomes a whisper. The art is not the tool, it's the silence that follows it. One quiet morning, you're in a garden trimming hedges as cover. The target of visiting noble strolls through trailing perfume and arrogance. You carry shears freshly oiled. When the moment comes, it's over in seconds. No mess, no scream. Just a final breath and a rose petal floating gently to the ground. You slip away, leaving behind only perfectly pruned hedges. One guard later remarks how tidy the garden looked that day. You take pride in that, because that's what your work is. Not glory, not recognition. Just the quiet satisfaction of a job done efficiently and visibly with whatever's in reach, whether it be spoonstring or scissors shaped like a bird. Let's talk about commuting. Modern assassins in films get motorcycles, limousines, maybe even a helicopter if the budget allows. You get a sewer. That's right, your primary route to most targets isn't a sleek rooftop sprint or a carriage with blackout curtains. It's the municipal underworld, damp, foul, ankle-deep in things no one should ever have to identify by texture alone. Welcome to the medieval sewer system. If you're lucky, it's stone-lined. If you're unlucky, it's just a ditch with very enthusiastic rats. You quickly learn the difference between sludge and slime, between things that squish and things that shouldn't squish. One time you slip on something gelatinous and discover a boot, just the boot. No foot inside. You decide not to ask where the rest of it went. The sewer, for all its filth, offers one undeniable advantage: invisibility. No self-respecting noble ever glances down a grating and wonders who might be sneaking below. You become a subterranean shadow, emerging like a damp ghost exactly where you're not supposed to be. The guardhouse near the western gate. It has a drainage pipe no one ever checks. The bishop's garden, a culvert disguised by ivy. You map it all out mentally, building a labyrinth of stink and freedom. Quirky detail number one. You aren't the only one using the tunnels. There's a whole community of night folk tanners, grave diggers, runaway servants, alchemists who've blown up one too many sheds. You nod at them in passing. Never speak and share a kind of unspoken code. We don't exist, and neither do you. Either. Quirky detail number two. Some assassins carry herbs just to survive the smell. A satchel of lavender pressed under your nose. A poultice of mint leaves tied to your neck. One eccentric killer supposedly wore a hollowed-out loaf of bread filled with rosemary like a nose mask. You consider copying him. Then remember the rat you saw chewing a similar loaf and decide against it. But the sewer's not just a road, it's a weapon. Once you're assigned a job in a fortified manner. The front gates are guarded. The back entrance watch the roof too high to scale without wings. But the kitchen drains down to a pit just wide enough to crawl through if you remove your belt and stop breathing for 10 seconds at a time. You squeeze through in the dead of night, praying the kitchen staff are deep asleep. They are. Unfortunately, the kitchen cats are not. One hisses, one bites. The third sits and watches as if judging your form. You whisper an apology and toss a dried fish to distract them. From there, you reach the cellar, and it's there surrounded by barrels of salted meat and three wheels of moldy cheese that you do your work. The mark is staying in the guest quarters, conveniently located just one creaky staircase above. You don't even need a blade this time, just the lockpicks in your boot heel and a draft of poppy milk to slip into his cup. Historians still argue whether medieval sewers were actively used for infiltration, or whether that's a modern fantasy born of too many novels. But archaeological studies do confirm that large cities like London and Paris had underground channels big enough to walk in and human enough to hide in. So it's not a stretch to believe someone like you in need of silence and shadows would take the lowest road. Of course it's not glamorous. The smell lingers. You burn your clothes after some trips. You keep a separate pair of boots just for sewer work, and you hide them far away from anything you care about like your dignity. Worst of all, there's the noise. You'd think the sewer would be quiet, but it isn't. Water drips, gas hisses. Something scurries too fast, too large. Once you swear you heard whispering, it could have been echoes. Could have been someone else. You didn't check. You also become intimately familiar with flooding. One moment you're ankle deep. The next, a storm-up river sends a gush of water roaring through, and you're clinging to an iron grate for dear life, wondering if this is how it ends, not with a dagger, but with a very fast and very brown bath. And yet there are upsides. In one case, you tail a merchant from the sewers emerging directly beneath the tavern, where he meets his lover once a week. You carve a message into the underside of his stool. Your secrets smell worse than this tunnel. He gets the hint. You're paid double to forget it ever happened. You even develop favorites. The South Culvert smells less awful in spring. The old aqueduct near the abandoned bathhouse has the best acoustics you once heard. An entire whispered confession echo through the pipes. And the tunnel beneath the ruined temple, well, that one's just peaceful for a sewer. Not all jobs start or end underground, but the best ones, the cleanest strikes, the quietest escapes, they often begin in filth. One memory sticks with you. A winter's night frost forming on the brick walls of the drainage tunnel. You're crouched beneath a palace, listening to the laughter of nobles echoing down through the grates. Above, candles flicker in chandeliers. Below, you shiver in a cloak made damp by the breath of centuries. And yet you smile, because no one up there knows you're coming. Sleep is a luxury you gave up long ago. Not because you don't like it, you love it. You dream about dreaming. But when your job involves creeping into locked rooms under moonlight and making sure people stop breathing quietly, your best hours happen when everyone else is unconscious. Which means you don't get to be. Assassination is a nighttime business. The day belongs to merchants, monks, and meat pies. The night belongs to you and things that scurry in the dark, and scurry you do. Through alleys, across rooftops, under floorboards. Always in motion, always awake. At first you try to maintain a normal rhythm. Sleep in the mornings, nap in the afternoons, wake when the bells toll vespers. But missions don't care about your schedule. One day you're up at midnight, the next at dawn. One job lasts 6 hours, another 2 full days without pause. Time becomes abstract. Bells become the only real markers. You start measuring your days in tolls and shadows, and it changes you. The first sign is when your hands begin to tremble, not from fear, but exhaustion. You drop a fork at a tavern and don't even hear it hit the floor. Elric, yes, somehow. Elric is still around jokes that you look like a haunted marionette. You don't laugh. You don't have the energy. Then the hallucinations begin. Not the dramatic kind. No floating angels or spectral enemies. Just flickers. shapes that vanish when you turn, voices that sound like your own thoughts but off, a cat that seems to wink knowingly, a chicken that seems to whisper your name. You blink a lot these days. Quirky detail number one. Some assassins swear by midnight oil, a mixture of vinegar, mint, crushed walnuts, and whatever stimulants they can find. It keeps you awake, but it also gives you burps that smell like a salad gone rogue. One assassin tried mixing it with wine. He's now known as Puddles Cedric. No one asks why. Quirky detail number two. Sleep-deprived assassins sometimes dream while awake. You once stood outside a manor for an hour convinced you'd already broken in and completed the job, only to realize you were still staring at the wall, dagger in hand, while a stable boy looked increasingly concerned. But still the job demands it. One contract has you following a noble who only visits his mistress at the third hour of the night. Another requires you to sneak into a monastery during matins prayers held before dawn. There's no such thing as after work when your whole profession happens during other people's dreams. Even when you're not killing, you're preparing to kill. Mixing poisons, repairing boots, writing coded letters, scraping wax off stolen scrolls and rewriting them by candlelight so the original can be replaced undetected. You spend entire evenings just watching someone's window, noting how many candles they use before bed, when the guard dog is fed, what kind of wine is delivered, and when. Historians still argue whether medieval assassins worked primarily at night or simply during vulnerable moments. But one thing is clear, the chaos of medieval timekeeping meant night could mean anything from twilight to the first crow of the rooster. Clocks were rare. Candles were clues. The body doesn't like this lifestyle. Your muscles ache in strange places. Your skin takes on a grayish hue as if it's forgotten how to reflect sunlight. You become increasingly sensitive to sound. Every creak becomes a threat. You start sleeping in short bursts, half dreaming with one eye open and one hand on your belt knife. You also develop odd habits. You count everything, steps, doors, breaths between flickers of a lantern. It grounds you, reminds you the world is real and not some haze stitched together by exhaustion. One time you lose count of stairs while sneaking through a bell tower and convince yourself you're in the wrong building. You weren't. And then there's the paranoia. You start checking door locks 3 times. You leave pebbles in your windowsill to see if anyone has touched it. You rig your sleeping mat with a hair so you'll know if it's been moved. It's not healthy, but it is helpful. Of course, not all assassins react the same way. Marek the Silent One seems immune. He naps during thunder. He once fell asleep in a hay cart being robbed by bandits. But you're constantly on the edge. You've convinced yourself that comfort equals vulnerability, which leads to some truly strange sleeping arrangements. Once you sleep standing in a closet for 2 hours. Another time you curl into a barrel half filled with barley. Your favorite might be the time you fell asleep inside a priest's confessional, woke up mid-snore, and gave a poor widow the fright of her life. She swore she'd seen the spirit of St. Bartholomew. You did not correct her. Over time, your body adapts somewhat. You start sleeping in patterns. 20 minutes here. A blink longer there. Like a fox always listening, always halfway ready to run. You become a master of micro-naps. You dream in flashes. Once you dream of a banquet where all the guests wear masks shaped like your face. You wake up laughing, then crying, then laughing again. You also start writing things down. Just small things. Names, faces, feelings. Because sleep deprivation eats memory. One morning you wake up with no idea what town you're in. It takes half a day to remember you're there for a wedding. Not to attend, to prevent, with a crossbow. From the bell tower, right. There's also the fear of dreaming, not the dreams themselves, but what they might reveal. You've done things, left people bleeding. You've seen guilt wear many faces. Sometimes it looks like a child watching their father fall. Sometimes it looks like your own hands stained and shaking. The dreams are rarely kind. And yet sleep remains your most dangerous weakness. One time, you sleep through a meeting with your handler. You wake up with a single black feather on your chest, a message that needs no explanation. You get up. You never miss a meeting again. Another time, a rival assassin uses your own trick against you, waits until your pattern breaks, slips into your quarters, while you snore in a wine-drunken heap, and leaves a coin on your pillow. Their mark, their warning. You don't sleep for 3 days after that. Eventually, you begin to understand being an assassin isn't just about taking lives. It's about giving up yours. No rest, no rhythm, no relief. You become a creature of edge and flicker, of half light and creaking stairs. And one quiet night just before sunrise, you stare at your reflection in a pool of rainwater and realize you don't quite recognize yourself. The eyes are yours, sure, but the face hollow, watchful, tired beyond anything a nap could fix. Still, the bells will ring soon, and your work isn't finished. Mistakes happen. Even the best assassins, those who can scale a roof blindfolded, blend into a crowd of monks, or fashion a weapon out of a cheese grater, sometimes miss their mark. Maybe it's bad intel, maybe it's bad luck, maybe the target happened to sneeze and lean left instead of right. Either way, now you've got a serious problem. You've killed the wrong man. Or worse, you didn't kill anyone at all. Take, for example, the time you were sent to eliminate a merchant named Harlan of Dunbridge. Middle-aged, wore a green cap, ate figs with alarming intensity. You shadowed him for 2 days, watched him haggle over cinnamon like it was gold, and finally caught him alone in the alley behind his warehouse. You stepped out of the shadows. He turned, you moved. The blade went in. Clean. Too clean. That wasn't Harlan. That was his brother Marlowe, visiting from Kent. Harlan arrived 20 minutes later and screamed when he saw the body. You slunk into the shadows, heart pounding. Job failed. Wrong corpse. Now what? The consequences of a mistake vary, but they're never good. If the client is petty, they refuse to pay and send word that you're unreliable. If the client is powerful, they put a bounty on your head and hire someone like you to clean up the mess, namely you. You've heard stories of assassins hunted by their own kind, cornered in forests, tossed into wells, or left in alleys with a single coin placed over each eye. Quirky detail number 1. Some assassin groups mark failed missions by carving a notch into the handle of your blade. Too many notches and your blade gets confiscated. If you're caught using a notched blade after that, it's considered defiance, and you're suddenly everyone's next contract. Quirky detail number 2. A failed job sometimes earns you a test. Complete 3 small assignments under impossible odds to cleanse your mistake. These often involve things like stealing a bishop's wine, sabotaging a noble's banquet, or delivering an insult to a tax collector's face, and surviving the next 5 minutes. You've done 2 out of 3. Still waiting on the third. You're hoping it doesn't involve swans. But the worst part of failure isn't the punishment, it's the exposure. When a kill is clean, silent, and efficient, no one knows you were there. But when it's messy, when the target survives or someone important sees your face, you become the hunted. Suddenly, you can't walk into a market without noticing too many eyes. You can't sleep in the same bed twice. You stop using your name, you shave your head, or grow a beard, or both. And if you really mess up, you end up in a wanted poster. Sure, most towns don't have artists accurate enough to capture your likeness, but the moment someone paints Slippery Killer with a limp and one blue eye under a crude drawing of a stick figure with a sword, That's you. Everyone knows it, especially because of the limp. That was from a ladder mishap. You don't want to talk about it. Historians still argue whether medieval authorities seriously pursued shadowy killers or simply blamed crimes on bandits and outsiders. Some say assassins were protected by guilds and church figures. Others believe they were disposable tools useful only until they slipped up. From personal experience, it feels like a bit of both. When you're useful, people look the other way. When you're not, they look for the nearest rope. You once botched a job in a cathedral. It was supposed to be a quiet elimination, a heretical monk who was secretly copying banned texts. You were meant to slip poison into his inkwell. Simple, elegant. But someone switched his desk assignment that morning. You end up poisoning a novice who is just trying to practice his calligraphy. The monk lives. The novice dies with ink on his hands and confusion in his eyes. You feel it, the weight of it. It's one thing to kill someone guilty, someone cruel, dangerous, corrupt. But a boy with shaky hands and dreams of becoming a scribe that lingers. You're pulled from assignments for a month. Not for punishment, just to recenter. You spend that time training sharpening blades that won't see use memorizing maps of cities you're not allowed to enter. You wonder if you're still trusted, or if you've been quietly marked for replacement. Then the letter comes, a single sheet folded twice. No seal, just 2 words, 1 chance. You take it. The job is a traveling envoy suspected of leaking secrets to an enemy court. No guards, no retinue. Just a man and a fast horse. You track him for days, finally catching him in a roadside inn, drunk on honey wine and shouting about border tariffs. You slip into his room knife ready, but he's already collapsed on the bed. You pause. Then you check his satchel. Inside coded letters, confirming the leak, confirming the threat. You finish the job, clean, no witnesses. You send the letter back, add 1 word done. You're restored for now. But the anxiety never leaves. Every job feels like it might spiral. Every plan has holes. Every disguise might slip. You learn to double-check everything locks roots, even your own shoelaces. One assassin tripped mid-pursuit because of a loose knot. She's now known only as Tumbles. You also stop assuming anyone is truly dead until you see the body go cold. Once a target fell from a tower, cracked his head on the cobbles, and was declared dead by 3 separate people. 3 hours later, he sat up and demanded wine. You had to finish the job again, this time with a candlestick. There are whispered names for assassins who fail too often. Ghost Meat, False Blade, the Unquiet. You don't want to be any of them, and so you adapt. You plan harder, you move faster. You don't allow nerves to take root, but you do listen more. You pay attention to things others miss, the way a guard holds his pike, the pattern of candle replacements in a corridor, the fact that one noble always carries a scarf dipped in perfume, probably to mask poison. You become sharper, but you also grow colder. Mistakes cost lives, sometimes innocent ones. You stop telling yourself you're a necessary evil. You stop telling yourself anything at all. You just do the work. And at night, when it's quiet and you lie awake in a rented room above a butcher shop, you stare at the ceiling and wonder how many lives you've taken and how many more you can bear. Then the knock comes, and it's time to make sure you don't make another mistake. Royalty is tempting. They glide through the world like living deities, glittering with jewels, trailed by fanfare, guarded like relics. But sometimes even kings must fall. And when they do, someone like you gets the call. The pay is extraordinary. The risk astronomical. Taking a contract on someone royal isn't like tailing a merchant or slipping poison to a monk. It's a whole different class of dangerous, because royalty doesn't die quietly. They die with fanfare, with spectacle, and with about 30 witnesses who will absolutely remember the shape of your nose. You're briefed by candlelight in the back room of a cathedral. The job, a young duke barely out of his teen years rumored to be courting rebellion. Too ambitious, too clever. Someone in his own family wants him removed. You're told it must look like an accident, which in the world of royal assassination usually means good luck and please don't get caught. You study his habits hunting in the woods, feasting in the hall, nightly walks in the garden, with a stringed lute and a smug expression. He's well guarded but careless. Young men who think themselves immortal often are. Your opening comes on a hunt. The Duke is fond of falconry. He wanders away from his retinue to adjust a hood on his bird. For 3 seconds, no one watches him. You almost take it. You feel the dagger press against your ribs. Then his hawk turns and stares directly at you from across the field. You freeze. You back away. You fail. That night, the castle is alive with suspicion. Someone saw a figure in the woods. The Duke tightens his guard. You're locked out. The mission is reclassified high risk. Quirky detail number 1 royalty often employed tasters not just for food, but for company. A jester might be asked to entertain a guest before the prince meets them. If the jester drops dead mid-joke, problem solved. You once watched a jester keel over after a lemon tart and fall face first into a cymbal. No one even moved to help. Quirky detail number 2. Some royal families had coded gestures to signal distress, placing a goblet on the left side of the plate instead of the right, adjusting a ring in public. You once failed to act because a queen subtly scratched her ear, which turned out to be a cry for help. The assassin posing as a lute player was caught. He wept as he was pulled apart by horses. You learned never to ignore a twitch. When it comes to royal targets, the biggest challenge isn't the target, it's the environment. Castles are traps. They echo, they creak. They have staircases that go nowhere and doors that groan like dying oxen. Every room has at least one guard, a servant, a cat, and a tapestry hiding who knows what. You can't just slip in, so you try something different, charm. You pose as a minor noble's attendant. Fake accent, shaved beard, a velvet doublet that smells like moths and desperation. You worm your way into a dinner where the Duke will attend. You are background noise, until you're not. The Duke notices you. Maybe it's the stillness. Maybe it's the way you cut your meat, always with your left hand, always in one clean stroke. He tilts his head, raises a goblet. You raise yours and reply, your smile a little too measured. Later, his steward intercepts you. You're summoned to a chamber. A test, surely. You go. Inside firelight, a wine flask, 2 guards. The Duke wants conversation. You give it to him. He speaks of politics, alliances, the frailty of trust. He hands you a cup. You hesitate. You drink. It's not poison. That would be too easy. He leans forward. You're not who you say you are, he murmurs. But I think you might be useful. You nod. The job changes. Historians still debate the number of royal deaths truly caused by shadowy agents like you. Some kings died of mystery fevers with suspicious timing. Some fell from windows in castles without windows. Some drowned in their own wine barrels. There are too many coincidences to dismiss, but too few records to confirm. What is certain is this: when a royal dies unnaturally, the fallout is spectacular. If you succeed, your name becomes a whisper behind doors. If you fail, your head becomes a lantern. You've seen it spikes on castle gates with shriveled faces that once had secrets. The worst part? The eyes sometimes remain open. And then there's the show. Royal executions are theater. When caught, you aren't merely punished, you're performed. The crowd needs to see your pain. It makes them feel safer. Your handler once told you, if you're caught, scream loud and fake. They'll cut quicker. One assassin didn't. He stayed silent through the rack, the iron boots, and the flaying. People said he must have been a demon. That's not true, you knew him. He just had nothing left to say. Another time you're tasked with protecting royalty. It's a curveball. A prince suspected of treachery hires you to kill the assassin coming for him. You accept mostly to see what that job feels like. You catch the killer, a woman dressed as a wine-made blade under the tray. You let her go. You lie to the prince. He doesn't deserve to die, but he doesn't deserve her death either. She nods once as she vanishes into the street. You never see her again. And maybe that's the closest thing to honor you'll ever find. Eventually, you stop taking royal jobs. The risks outweigh the gold. You prefer lesser targets now. Quiet men, greedy priests, lying merchants. Their deaths go unnoticed, unrecorded, unremembered. You've learned your lesson. Killing a royal is like throwing a stone at a beehive. You may hit your mark, but you will not walk away clean. And you like walking away? Not every assassin wears boots and broods in alleyways. Some wear pearls. You first meet her in a wine cellar where she's hiding behind a crate of apricot brandy and humming an off-key lullaby. Her name isn't really Lisette, but that's what she tells you, and it sticks. She's dressed like a merchant's wife, too fine to be dusty, too dusty to be noble. Her cheeks are flushed from the heat or the kill or both. She's just finished a job neatly, efficiently. The wine merchant above never knew what hit him. Something about a debt or a message or a misplaced word whispered to the wrong noble. You don't ask, she doesn't offer. Instead, she passes you a biscuit and says, "You've got blood on your sleeve." You check. She's right. Women in the business are rarer but far from unheard of. In many ways, they're better. Overlooked, underestimated, free to move in spaces men can't. Kitchens, parlors, dressing rooms, confessionals. You've known more than one who killed with nothing more than a comb. Lisette, it turns out, favors needles. Long ones. Dipped in poison or occasionally left clean. She says the fear of poison is sometimes enough. Quirky detail number 1. Some female assassins used perfume as a weapon, not the contents but the bottle. Thick glass small enough to hide in a sleeve, heavy enough to crack a skull. One even designed hers with a hollow cap that could drip laudanum into tea with a tilt of the wrist. Quirky detail number 2. One notorious woman known only as Mother Mercy posed as a midwife for 2 decades. She was invited into noble homes, whispered into the ears of laboring women, and once killed a duke by slipping belladonna into his bath while delivering his 4th child. No one suspected her, ever. Lisette isn't so subtle. She prefers close work, flesh breath, eye contact. If I'm going to end someone, she says they should know who did it, even if it's the last thing they know. You find this intense. Still, you work together a few times. Not as partners exactly, but intersecting lines. She distracts a guard with a smile. You slip past to the library. You leave a window unlatched. She's through it hours later. You share signals. Looks a faint sense of mutual respect. And one night, everything goes wrong. You're both assigned the same target, a baron known for collecting secrets like chess pieces. Neither of you knows the other's been hired. You break into his study through the chimney, soot-stained and wheezing. She's already there, crouched behind the tapestry. You both freeze. The baron turns. Sees neither of you. Starts reading a scroll aloud in a droning voice that makes your eyelids twitch. Lisette mouths. Now you shake your head. She shrugs, steps out, and stabs him in the neck with a hairpin, before he can mispronounce another syllable. You stare. She says we should probably flip a coin for the pay. You do. She wins. It's hard not to respect her. Historians still argue how widespread women were in medieval assassination circles. Traditional roles kept many records scrubbed, but the absence of proof isn't proof of absence. Whispered legends mention ladies-in-waiting who whispered death into ears, herbalists who brewed more than tea, widows who weren't mourning but waiting. Lisette doesn't mourn anything. She drinks too much, laughs too loud, and dances when she thinks no one's watching. But once in a quiet moment, you ask her why she does it. She says, because when I was 16, a man tried to buy me. And when I told him no, he took anyway, so now I take back. You don't press. She never mentions it again. But after that, you understand the glint behind her smile. There are others, too. You meet a nun who isn't a nun. Her robes are real. Her faith is not. She confesses sins she never committed, watches. Faces gathers rumors. She once poisons an entire plate of blessed wafers to stop a bishop from selling a relic to a foreign court. You nod respectfully, she nods back. Neither of you ever says a word. Then there's the girl in the mask. No name, no voice. Just a silver fox painted on her cheek and blades hidden in her sleeves. You face her once opposite contracts. You both survive. Barely. The second time you help her escape from a burning chapel. She leaves you a black ribbon tied around your boot. You still have it. Women like these don't get written into ballads. They vanish. By choice, by force, by fate. Sometimes you see their handiwork in places no one else notices. A dropped comb at the foot of a lord's bed, a perfume bottle left behind in a cold guest room, a scrap of lace tied to a broken weather vane. Signatures if you know how to read them, and sometimes you hear rumors Lisette's name murmured in foreign taverns. A masked girl glimpsed on a boat bound for Sicily. A nun who vanished just before a cardinal died of fever. You wonder if they're still out there. You hope they are? Because if there's any justice in this crooked trade, it's that those who move best in the dark deserve to keep moving. And maybe one day you'll cross paths again. Share a coin toss or a drink, or a story so twisted it has to be true. Until then, you keep your distance, not out of fear, out of respect. Because you've learned something crucial, never underestimate someone wearing a smile and holding a pin. Poison is for cowards. At least that's what the sword swingers say, those brash brutes who prefer their kills, loud, dramatic, and blood-splattered across banners. But those of you who operate in quiet corners know better. Poison is patient. It's personal. It requires finesse calculation and an unsettling comfort with watching someone die while sipping wine across the room. Still, it's far from easy. First, problem sourcing it. There's no assassins Aras in the medieval marketplace. Poisons must be grown, harvested, extracted, brewed, tested, and most dangerously trusted. One wrong mix and you'll end up just as dead as your intended target. You've spent nights bent over a smoky hearth, stirring bubbling tinctures while trying not to inhale too deeply. You once passed out after sniffing something called Redcap's Kiss. You woke up 2 days later with no memory of how you got into a bell tower wearing a chicken mask. Second problem, testing. The golden rule is never use a new poison without trial. But testing poisons is ethically complicated. Animals are scarce. Peasants are curious. Once you watched a novice assassin test a sleeping Drafton himself just to be sure. He slept for 4 straight days and missed the contract entirely. The guild awarded him a ceremonial pillow. You, however, are more careful. You test a new batch of hemlock on your own toenail, just a drop. Wait. See if it tingles. It does. That's enough. You then mix it into a fig paste and smear it inside a nobleman's candied walnut. He dies at supper face down in a gravy boat. Quirky detail number 1. There's a poison made from fermented eel bile that smells exactly like old onions. Perfect for stew, less perfect for personal dignity. One cook fainted just from the aroma and was wrongly accused of murder. You cleared his name. He now sends you free bread once a month. Quirky detail number 2. The most expensive poison you ever used came from a dried sea sponge ground into powder. It had to be imported from the East, packed in wax and hidden in a fake candle. It cost more than your horse and worked slower than molasses, but when it finally struck, the victim collapsed mid-lute recital and was declared emotionally overcome. Very poetic. Some clients request poisons because they want subtlety, others because they want deniability. A stabbed corpse raises eyebrows, a sudden illness in winter. Just another case of the chills. You've watched entire inheritance schemes unfold thanks to a timely mug of bitter herb tea. But poison's greatest weakness is its visibility after the fact. If someone dies too strangely, too conveniently, too quietly, the whispers start. Tasting rooms are reinforced. Servants are interrogated, cooks are blamed. One royal feast ended with 3 dead dogs of vomiting night, and a very angry bishop who accused you of hexes. You hadn't even been hired that day. Which brings us to the art of distraction. You rarely serve poison directly. Instead, you pass it along. A gift basket. A love letter dusted with toxin-laced powder. A kiss on a ring finger soaked in belladonna. You once delivered a poisoned comb to a vain duchess with a habit of brushing her hair 50 times before bed. She died mid-stroke mirror in hand. Historians still argue whether poisonings in the medieval period were as common as the stories suggest. Some claim it's a myth born of fear and gossip. Others argue it was the preferred method for eliminating political rivals, lovers, or inconvenient heirs. The truth likely lies in between, somewhere between romantic exaggeration and a bowl of spiced porridge gone terribly wrong. Your personal favorite A blend you call whisper salt. Tasteless, odorless, slow. It mimics fever for 2 days, then causes the victim to fall asleep and never wake. You developed it after weeks of trial. You carry a pinch and a hollow ring. You've only used it twice. Both times no one even realized foul play was involved. But poison carries risks beyond detection. One time a bottle of wine you prepared is intercepted and gifted to the wrong guest. Instead of your target, a quiet lute player drinks it and dies mid-song. Your target thinks it was an assassination attempt. Aimed at him, doubles his guard and flees the city. You spend 3 days trying to correct the mistake and another week listening to terrible lute music in his honor. Another time you botch the dose too little. The mark survives sickened, but alert. He remembers your face. You're forced to finish the job more traditionally, in a grain silo with a shovel. Not your finest moment. You learn to label everything meticulously. A single mix-up can ruin your reputation or your organs. You once misread a vial and drank what you thought was anti-paralytic. It wasn't. You collapsed in a pantry for 6 hours and woke up covered in flour. The local baker swears you're his guardian spirit now, and yet despite the risks, poison remains a favorite. It's quiet, it's intimate. It allows you to watch from a distance as destiny unfolds without lifting a blade. It also gives you options. You've used poison to start wars. One noble poisoned, another blamed, and suddenly 2 cities are at each other's throats while you collect your payment and vanish. You've used it to spare lives, slipping sleeping drafts into drinks to make someone appear dead long enough to escape an execution. And just once, you used poison to send a message. You delivered a bottle of wine to a corrupt magistrate along with a note. This is not poisoned. Yet, he quit 3 days later, took vows, and became a monk. You check in on him sometimes. He still jumps when someone says your name. There's power in poison, not just in what it does, but in what it threatens to do. A whispered fear, a wary sip, a lingering doubt. You don't always need to kill. Sometimes you just need someone to believe you could. And in your line of work, belief is everything. It was supposed to be clean. One mark, one moment. A quiet end followed by a quieter exit. But you missed. Maybe your dagger slipped. Maybe the target wore armor under his tunic. Maybe he turned at the last second and saw you coming. Whatever the cause, your blade glanced off his side instead of sinking in, and now you're running. Not sneaking, not slipping, running. Like a clumsy, overpaid thief who just tried to rob death and fumbled the bag. You bolt through the manor, dodging servants' candles and a surprised goose someone was inexplicably keeping in the hallway. The goose honks, loudly. The guards shout. Someone yells, "Assassin," as if you needed the reminder. You leap a wall, tear your cloak, land in a compost heap. You don't even have time to mourn your dignity. You just run. And from that moment on, you are marked. Not with ink, not with scarlet, but in whispers, in widened eyes, and doors that suddenly don't open for you anymore. The guild knows. The clients know. Worst of all, the target knows. And if he has money and grudges, he's going to make your life very, very complicated. First come the posters. Crude drawings nailed to tavern walls. A reward scrawled beneath your likeness, which bears an uncanny resemblance to a startled potato. Still, someone recognizes you. You lose a tooth in the brawl that follows. You lose your boots running away from it. You start sleeping in different towns every night. Then the bounty hunters arrive. Quirky detail number one. One of your pursuers travels with a trained ferret that can sniff out certain oils used in your line of work. You spend 2 days hiding in a barrel of vinegar just to throw it off your trail. You emerge smelling like a salad, and not in the good way. Quirky detail number two. A noble sends a troupe of actors to perform a play reenacting your failed kill. In it, you're portrayed as a shrieking jester with a wooden spoon. It's an unexpected hit. Audiences love it. You see it performed once in disguise and can't decide whether to laugh or cry. Being marked changes everything. People treat you differently. Some admire you for surviving. Some cross the street when they see you. Others see an opportunity you're weakened, desperate, perhaps willing to take riskier jobs for lower pay. One greasy merchant offers you a job stabbing his brother in exchange for a cart full of beets. You politely decline, then stab him for wasting your time. You try to lay low. Grow a beard. Dye your hair with walnut ink. You pose as a scribe, a tinker, a monk in training. For a while it works, but the paranoia lingers. You sleep with your knife under your tongue. You stop drinking anything you didn't pour yourself. You start checking roofs for crossbowmen before entering courtyards. Historians still argue whether medieval assassins had structured bounty systems, or whether that's a romantic embellishment. But records do show that failed murder attempts, especially high-profile ones, often led to months, sometimes years of retaliation. The most skilled assassins weren't just lethal, they were forgettably lethal. And you unfortunately are now memorable. You take work where you can. Smuggling, message running. Once you help a scholar retrieve a stolen manuscript from a rival, he asks why your handwriting is so clean. You tell him it's because you used to forge death warrants. He doesn't ask any more questions. But always you're watching over your shoulder. A failed kill is a fraying thread, and the longer you wait, the more tangled things become. So you decide to fix it. You start with rumors. A tavern here, a butcher there. You hear your target, the one who escaped, has become emboldened, parading around, telling tales, laughing too loudly. He's hired guards, wears mail under his robes, holds a hunting falcon even though he clearly doesn't know how to use it. You get close, not to kill yet, first to watch, to listen, to learn what's changed. Turns out he's not as protected as he seems. His guards are lazy, his habits predictable, his arrogance your best ally. You prepare. This time, no dramatic entry, no rooftop chase. You find his favorite bathhouse. You bribe a laundress. You slip the blade into a bar of soap. A week later, he cuts himself shaving and dies from a poison so slow no one notices until it's far too late. Your name clears quietly. No fanfare, no applause. But suddenly, doors open again. The guild sends you a note, balance restored. It's written in dried ink that smells faintly of lavender. Someone somewhere is pleased with you, but you never stop feeling the phantom weight of failure. It haunts you like a limp you don't quite have. Even now when jobs go smoothly, you still double-check the pulse. Still walk the long way home. Still avoid goose-shaped shadows. You become sharper. You learn to ask better questions. Is this target worth the risk? Who benefits if I fail? What don't I know? You stop trusting simple contracts. You start charging more. You say no more often than yes. People think you've grown wise. Really, you've just grown cautious. Because once you've missed your mark, you know the cost. Not just in coin, not just in blood, but in the way your reflection looks at you afterward like it's disappointed. Like it expected better. And maybe it should have. It doesn't exist. Not officially. Not in charters or scrolls or noblemen's letters. There is no seal, no headquarters, no recruitment office. And yet it runs like a nervous system behind the body of medieval society, the guild, or the web as some call it. Whispers claim it stretches across kingdoms, threading through stables, kitchens, monasteries, and docks. It isn't one group, but many loosely entangled clusters of assassins, informants, poisoners, disguisers, and facilitators, bound together by favors, fear, and quiet necessity. You were never invited into the guild. No one handed you a robe and said, "Welcome, initiate." No. One day a man handed you a coin stamped with a crow. 2 weeks later, someone else handed you a vial of oil and a name. The next job was easier. The next getaway was smoother. You never asked, you understood. That's how the guild operates, never all at once. Its members communicate in fragments. One steward passes you a list of servants. A washerwoman leaves a ribbon tied to a lamppost as a signal. A child delivers a message to Mr. Nobody, then vanishes. You suspect even they don't know how many are involved. Maybe that's the point. Quirky detail number 1. The guild has no official language, but certain phrases mean more than they seem. Cold wine tonight can mean abort the mission. Birdsong at dawn means target will move early. There's even a whole coded conversation involving fish varieties that's mostly used in seaside cities. You once had to spend 20 minutes discussing salted herring just to confirm a pickup location. Quirky detail. Number 2, payment isn't always coin. The guild trades in secrets, access, and disappearances. One assassin got a new identity in exchange for retrieving a noble's missing cat. The cat was not missing, it was relocated. No one leads the guild in the traditional sense. There's no grandmaster, no council in embroidered robes. But there is someone called the Ink. You've never met them. You're not even sure they're real. But now and then a sealed letter arrives in black parchment. The wax is soft, dark red. Inside instructions so precise they read like fate. One such letter simply said, "Midday, third bell, Do nothing. You obeyed. That day, your rival was found dead in a well. You didn't ask how. Historians still argue whether any such guild existed in medieval Europe. The Italian Sicarii, the Middle Eastern Hashashin, the shadowy black brotherhoods of the Baltics, some records say yes. Others dismiss them as myth invented to explain deaths that polite society couldn't rationalize. But, the guild, whatever name it goes by, exists in glances, gestures, shadows that follow just a step too close. You feel it in taverns when three strangers go quiet at once. You see it in the man at market who carries no basket but always lingers by the pears. Joining isn't about ceremony, it's about usefulness. You've provided information, moved targets, done favors that weren't jobs but tests. Once you delivered a bundle of herbs to a hermit in the woods, no questions asked. A month later, you survived an ambush because someone had doused your sleeping bag with fox urine. Not pleasant, but it kept the dogs off. Eventually, the guild begins to recognize you not with praise, but with access. Suddenly, you're offered better equipment. A courier leaves a new dagger in your saddlebags. A stable boy replaces your old boots with a pair lined in waxed linen, silent even on gravel. You don't know who paid. You don't ask. There are rules, too. Not written down, but enforced all the same. Rule 1. No guild work on other guild members, ever, unless authorized by the Inc. Rule 2. No unnecessary deaths. Bodies draw attention. Attention kills webs. Rule 3. If you fail, clean up after yourself or someone else will, and not gently. Break a rule and you're cut loose. Not fired, not scolded. Cut. People vanish. Contacts go dark. A month later, someone else is wearing your ring and speaking your lines, and you don't exist anymore. You've heard stories. A man who betrayed a guild safe house was found sewn into a tapestry. A woman who skimmed payments woke up to find her hand missing, replaced with a note that read, "Now we're even." You walk carefully. But the guild isn't all knives and shadows. It's a safety net. When you're injured after a fall from a manor roof, you wake in a hayloft with your wounds bandaged. A girl with no name gives you broth and a knife. You leave before dawn, but you never forget. And when you find a novice assassin hiding in a crypt, starving and shaking, you leave him food and a whisper, "Don't freeze up on rooftops." It's a strange fraternity. You've never toasted together. You don't know half their names. But you've shared the same fear, the same tricks, the same understanding that your work only lasts as long as you're useful and invisible. One winter, you're summoned unusual in itself. The message is brief. Meet at the burned chapel, new moon, no blades. You go more curious than cautious. Inside 3 others. One old one, young one masked. You sit in silence for 10 minutes. Then the oldest one speaks. "There's a man in the capital," he says. "He's hunting us." Not the first time. But this one's clever. He pretends to be a priest, offers confession, learns secrets. He's already unpicked 3 names from the web. The guild doesn't tolerate unraveling. You're asked to stop him. No contract, no coin. Just obligation. So you do. You travel. You pose. You find him. You watch, and one quiet evening you confess your sins to him, just enough to bait the hook. He smiles. Later that night he dies. No poison, no blade. Just a confession that never ends and a rope tied in prayer knots. You report nothing. But a week later someone places a carved wooden ring at your door. It smells of juniper. You wear it for years. Because in a world that forgets the nameless, the guild remembers you. Not with praise, with purpose. If God is watching, he's suspiciously quiet about all this. You weren't raised for this work, but you were raised to fear hell. To sit still in stone chapels, to repeat the prayers you didn't understand, to believe that certain things, murder, deceit, pride, were sins black enough to stain your soul forever. And yet here you are, creeping through cathedral shadows with a blade tucked behind your ribs. The irony, some of your best clients wear robes. The church condemns murder. Officially, repeatedly, loudly. Yet beneath the incense and Latin chants there are whispers. Monasteries that handle problems internally. Bishops who request divine interventions in the form of sudden accidents. One abbess, red-eyed and trembling, once gave you a vial of holy water blessed 3 times and asked you to drown a man with it. You didn't, but you took the coin. Church contracts are delicate. They rarely use the word kill. Instead, phrases like silence the voice or shield the flock or remove the blasphemy appear. You're expected to understand. You always do. One priest hires you to eliminate a rival who's begun preaching a dangerously liberal interpretation of Scripture that God loves the poor more than the rich. The irony nearly knocks you over. You do the job and the sermon stops. The coins you're paid with bear the king's face and the bishop's approval. Quirky detail number 1. Certain monasteries kept a book of silence, a ledger where suspicious deaths were recorded in code, just in case divine favor required a nudge. You glimpsed one once, its cover plain, its pages smelling faintly of ash and wax. One entry simply read Brother Alwyn. Silence secured before sermon. Thanks be. Quirky detail number 2. Some abbots employed blind scribes as intermediaries. They wrote contracts they couldn't read, delivered orders they couldn't recall. The logic was twisted, they remained pure, untainted by knowledge. One even thanked you after a delivery, utterly unaware what you'd done. You didn't have the heart to correct him. Historians still debate the extent of church involvement in medieval political violence. Some believe the clergy merely turned a blind eye. Others insist entire monastic orders functioned as covert arms of noble families, managing both prayer and punishment from behind cloistered walls. You don't need to argue, you've been there. You've crept through abbey corridors by moonlight listening to monks chant, while slipping past tapestries hiding ancient staircases. You've witnessed a cardinal kiss a stolen relic for luck before commissioning the death of the only man who could trace its origin. And only once you were blessed before a job. May your hands serve God's will, the priest said. You wore gloves that day. But not all holy men are clients. Some are enemies. There's a friar in the East who claims to smell death. He's exposed 3 of your peers already. 1 died in the stocks. 1 fled across the sea. The 3rd? Well, she never fled at all. Just smiled and told him, even God sleeps sometimes. You've avoided him so far. Barely. There's also a rogue order of inquisitors men who claim to root out heresy, but often seek power through fear. They've tortured names from dying lips and now hunt those names like game. Yours may be on their list, you keep moving. And then there are the genuinely devout. You've met them. Quiet men. Earnest women. Believers so full of love and pain they radiate something warm. One nun once stitched a wound on your arm after a rooftop mishap. She didn't ask what caused it. She just said, may this pain serve something better. You almost cried. Sometimes you go to chapel. Not for forgiveness you doubt that's on offer, but for silence. For shadows. For the feeling that maybe someone is watching who understands. You don't light candles, but you watch others do it. Once you were followed. A novice monk with nervous eyes and questions he didn't ask. You cornered him behind the chapel. He didn't run, just said, if you're lost, you should stay. The quiet might help. You let him live. That was years ago. You wonder if he remembers. And still the church continues to hire, to fear, to bless. You've received rosaries as payment. Silver crosses. One job ended with a feast where you were seated next to a bishop and praised for your quiet work for the greater good. You smiled and nodded. You could still smell blood on your sleeves. The contradictions weigh on you. You've killed for men who kneel before gold-plated altars. You've saved lives by ending others. You've whispered prayers you no longer believe just in case someone still listens. You've killed men who deserved it and some who didn't. You've wondered what happens after. But in the end, you keep moving. Because whether or not God watches, the church certainly does. And unlike God, the church has knives. Borders are supposed to be lines on a map, tidy, rational, the stuff of treaties and ink. In practice, they're nightmares in chainmail. Crossing from one medieval realm to another is rarely smooth, even under ideal conditions. But for someone like you, whose entire job depends on slipping unnoticed through fragile political seams, it's a lesson in patience disguise, and occasionally swimming through a moat with leeches in places you don't want to name. Your work doesn't respect borders. Contracts come from one kingdom, targets live in another, and the hand that pays often doesn't match the name on the wax seal. Sometimes your client doesn't even know exactly who you are. That's the arrangement. Cleaner that way. But to do your job, you need to get in. And that's where things get complicated. You begin each border crossing with the disguise pilgrim, peddler, shepherd, widow. You've used them all. A favorite of yours is lost monk, because monks are expected to look exhausted, underfed, and slightly confused. That's your natural state most days. Still, the guards are sharp. They ask questions. Where are you headed? What's in the sack? Why do your hands look like they've held a dagger more recently than a sheep? You lie. Fluently. Once you tear up on command and begin muttering prayers in a broken dialect of Latin, you barely remember from chapel eavesdropping. It works. The guard lets you pass and hands you a stale carrot for the road. You eat it, you're not proud. Quirky detail. Number 1. Some borders use passwords, ancient holdovers from wartime that no one bothers to update. One such word is gristle. You only discover this after mumbling it in frustration to a donkey while being searched. The guard lets you through immediately. You pretend it was on purpose. Quirky detail. Number 2. There's a border in the north where you're required to sing your reason for crossing. A local tradition born from a bard's prank that was never repealed. You can't sing, you hum. Loudly, the guards laugh and wave you in. You're convinced they were just afraid you'd keep going. Once inside a new territory, you're immediately at a disadvantage. Different laws, different dialects, different uniforms. One wrong color in your cloak, one wrong accent, and someone notices. You learn to listen first, speak second. You watch how people walk, how they hold their spoons, how they curse. You've mimicked accents so well, even your own tongue forgets where it came from. Historians still argue about how porous medieval borders truly were. Some say travelers crossed freely with a nod and a prayer. Others claim a man couldn't sneeze near a frontier without producing 3 seals and a goat's worth of bribes. You suspect both are true depending on who's sneezing. And then there's the problem of papers. The upper classes have travel documents signed by dukes or bishops, or someone with at least 2 titles. You have forged versions made in dim rooms by ink-stained hands that sometimes forget to spell merchant the same way twice. You once handed a border warden a document that claimed you were an official turnip auditor. They let you pass. You still don't know why. But sometimes nothing works. The guards are too alert. The disguise is too thin. The gate is simply closed. So you find alternatives. There's a shepherd's path across the cliff line, steep, rocky, haunted by a cow with territorial issues. You've used it 3 times. You name the cow judge. You're pretty sure she remembers you. There's an underground smuggler's tunnel through the southern marshes, mud up to your chest, frogs the size of plates. The guide demanded payment in buttons. You gave him 5 and he wept. Still not sure if from joy or madness. There's a bridge half-collapsed slippery with moss that connects 2 warring duchies. Neither side guards it, too proud to admit the other exists. You crossed it barefoot, once dagger between your teeth, rain soaking your sleeves, cursing every saint whose name you knew. You made it. But crossing back, that's often harder. Once your job is done, you're not welcome. You're not celebrated, you're hunted. That smiling merchant you helped, he's dead. That innkeeper who gave you soup, she's arrested. Your face probably sketched on a wall a suspicious pilgrim with glinty eyes. They always draw the eyes too big. You learn to leave before the news does, before the body's cold, before the guards even realize which door was open. Once you escape across a frozen river, the ice cracks. You don't look back. Another time you sneak onto a barge loaded with pigs. The smell sticks with you for a week. Even the guild makes fun of you. You endure it. You survived. Eventually, you begin to dread border jobs. Not because they're harder, but because they remind you how fragile your identity is. You're not from anywhere anymore. Your past is a patchwork. Your names change faster than your boots wear out. You meet people you like but can't know. You sleep in towns you'll never return to. The world feels bigger when you're always outside its gates. And then one night, after a job gone mostly right, you find yourself on the edge of a new kingdom. The border is a line of trees and a small toll house. A lantern swings in the breeze. The guard is asleep. You could sneak by easy, but you don't. You walk up, you smile, you offer your forged papers. The guard, groggy and bored, glances once and waves you through. And for a moment you feel normal. Just a traveler. Just a face. Just a person moving forward. Until the next gate. You don't fear swords, you fear armor. It's not the gleam of steel or the weight of it that troubles you. It's what it does to your job. A blade slices skin, but armor laughs at you? Knights, lords, and overcompensating foot soldiers wear it like a second skin, layers of chainmail, boiled leather-padded gambesons, and finally the polished plate. You once heard a blacksmith describe it as walking inside your own locked chest. You agree. And the moment someone orders you to assassinate a man in full armor, you feel your stomach sink. Because stabbing someone in armor is like trying to kill a statue with a butter knife. Your first armored target is a baron. Big. Bearded. Built like a barrel in a closet. He sleeps in his armor truly. Claims it's safer that way. He's not wrong. You sneak into his chambers, blade drawn, only to find he's snoring inside a half-suit of plate, one gauntlet still clenched around a turkey leg. You stare at him for a full minute, then quietly walk away. What are you supposed to do? Tickle him to deaths? Eventually you learn the trick aim for the gaps. The armpits, the back of the knees, the tiny opening beneath the chin. But getting close enough to strike there, that's a different problem entirely, because if you mess it up, all you do is make them angry. And angry men in armor swing maces. You once tried to poison a knight's drinking horn. He fed it to his dog first. The dog exploded. The knight laughed. You never got another chance. Quirky detail number 1. Some assassins developed tools just for armored kills, thin spikes called misericords, designed to slip between joints and ribs. You carry one. It's called thread, because that's how narrow your chances are. Quirky detail. Number 2. There was a rumored poison oil that could soften steel. You tried it once on a suit of mail. It did soften something. Unfortunately, it was your fingers. You couldn't hold a spoon for 2 days. Lesson learned. But it's not just about penetration, it's noise. Armor clinks, clangs, and creaks. It betrays movement. Your targets often sound like a walking cutlery drawer. You've tracked knights by the jingle of their thighs, but it goes both ways. If you wear any metal at all, it gives you away. So you don't. You move silent and soft even when it means risking a blow that might turn your bones into soup. Still, some jobs offer no choice. You're once ordered to eliminate a champion, a knight who's never lost a duel. His name is Sir Rodel. His armor is black, his temper worse. You can't sneak into his quarters. He sleeps in a tent surrounded by guards, so you enter the tournament instead. As a participant, wearing a borrowed hauberk which smells of goat and despair, you march into the arena and face him under the gaze of 1,000 shouting townsfolk. The plan? Get close. Just close enough. Not to win, but to touch him with a poisoned pin sewn into your glove. It almost works. He disarms you with one blow, but as he lifts his visor to gloat, you brush his wrist. A flick, nothing more. He laughs. 2 days later, he dies in his sleep. You're already halfway to another town. Historians still debate whether assassins often engaged in open combat. Some claim duels were occasionally used as a front for silent kills. Others argue such public exposure was too dangerous. You've done it exactly once. You never want to again, because the more armor a man wears, the more eyes he has on him. Bodyguards, squires, heralds. You once counted 14 people attending to a single duke before breakfast. Even the chamber pot had a dedicated lifter. You'd need an entire choir of distractions to slip a blade through that curtain. So you adapt. One time you flood a cellar beneath a castle. Just a little. Just enough. The armored guard slips on the whetstones and crashes down 3 flights of stairs. His armor saves him from death. It also traps him in a corner where he can't get up. You walk past him as he shouts. You wave. Another time you loosen the straps of a knight's greaves while pretending to help saddle his horse. Later, mid-hunt the greaves fall. He trips. The boar he's chasing doesn't. No one blames you. The boar is stuffed and mounted in the hall. You begin to see armor not as protection, but as a prison. The weight, the heat, the limited visibility. You use it against them. You once trapped a count in his own breastplate by slipping a wedge into the fastening at his shoulder. When the fire started purely accidental, you assure yourself he couldn't remove it in time. He survived, but the embarrassment ensured he resigned his post and never left his estate again. Sometimes you just wait. Armor comes off eventually. You follow one target for days, never striking. He eats in it, sleeps in it, bathes with it nearby. But on the 7th day in a hot summer bathhouse, he finally sheds the steel. You're already inside, disguised as a servant. He never sees you. You leave no trace. And that's what the armored forget armor defends the body. It doesn't defend the moment. The breath between meals, the sigh before sleep, the itch they scratch near their ribs. That's when you strike. That's when you win. Still, you hold a strange respect for the armored ones. Not because they're brave, because they're burdened. You've worn chainmail once, just once. It pinched, it stank, it slowed you. You hated every second. You prefer silence over steel, speed over spectacle, because armor doesn't save you from what you can't hear coming, and that's where you live. A safe house sounds comforting. You picture a cozy room tucked behind a bakery, perhaps with a warm fire, a decent mattress, maybe even a cat that doesn't judge. A place where you can breathe clean your boots and pretend just for a moment that you're not a hunted shadow. But medieval safe houses aren't cozy. They're functional, which is a polite way of saying damp, cramped, and possibly haunted. Your first safe house is a cellar, not beneath a house beneath a stable. The ceiling is low enough to kiss your head if you sit up too fast. The straw smells of regret. There's a single blanket which may once have been a tapestry depicting a saint, but now mostly depicts stains. The chamber pot is enthusiastic. You name it, Gertrude. You stay there 3 days. The floor slopes. Rainwater trickles through the wall. You keep your dagger close and your back to the door, just in case. Because the truth is, a safe house isn't actually safe. It's a temporary hiding spot useful until it isn't. Half the time you don't know who built it, who used it last, or who else has a key. Quirky detail. Number 1. Some safe houses are marked with carvings only visible in moonlight etchings on stone or wood that reflect faint glimmers when the angle's just right. One such symbol looks like a chicken standing on a chalice. You never learn why, but it works. You're let in. Quirky detail number 2. One guild safe house was located inside a disused bell tower. To enter, you had to ring the bell exactly once at dusk, then climb the rope into the rafters. You did it once, nearly broke your arm, and spent the night listening to bats argue overhead. It still beats sleeping on a cart axle. Some safe houses are behind bakeries. One even let you earn your keep by kneading dough at dawn. You got flour in your cloak and a mild burn on your wrist, but the bread was decent, and the baker didn't ask questions. He gave you a crust of rye and a nod. That nod meant more than most contracts. Others are more creative. There's a mill house where the entrance is hidden behind the turning wheel. There's a room beneath a graveyard mausoleum, its door disguised as a coffin lid. One friend swore by a cave reachable only at low tide. He drowned. You never tested it, and still others are absolute nightmares. One is infested with fleas so persistent they chew through your socks. Another is built under a butcher's shop. You spend the night surrounded by pigs' heads and the sound of dripping fat. You once woke up to a goat chewing your hair. You weren't even mad, just tired. Historians often overlook these spaces. Safe houses don't leave records. They're not castles, not monuments. They're the forgotten corners of cities. Closets behind wine barrels, unused crypt niches, dusty attics above brothels. Yet they're as vital to your survival as any blade. You begin to maintain your own network. Not grand, not permanent, but useful. A woodshed outside Caen camouflaged with ivy. A barn loft near Verona with a floorboard stash of dried fruit and coin. A tiny chapel near the border, long abandoned, where you've stashed maps behind a crumbling altar. You visit them rarely, only when the heat rises or when your face appears on a tavern wall, drawn with impressive spite. You once added a mustache to your own likeness to buy time. It worked. Sometimes a safe house becomes a second home. There's one you return to more often than others, a cellar beneath a library, dry and quiet. You helped the librarian, once retrieved a stolen scroll, returned it silently. He never thanked you aloud, but the next time you passed by a trapdoor was unlocked. Inside a cot, a candle, and a shelf of books you can't read, but like to look at anyway. You stay there 3 nights. You heal. You sleep deeply. Then you vanish, because that's the rule: never linger. A safe house used too long becomes a trap. You saw it happen once. A young assassin named Corwin. He loved a room above a tannery. Said it felt like his. He was right. It became his tomb. They found him face down in his stew. And sometimes you're not alone. You slip into one safe house in Prague only to find someone already there, a woman with a crossbow and eyes like winter. She says nothing. You nod. You share the space. One sleeps, one watches. Then you switch. By morning you're gone. So is she. That's how it works. No names, no promises. Only silent straw and the shared knowledge that you're not meant to stay. Only survive. You start leaving small signs. Chalk marks under tables. Smudges on stone, a single nail turned sideways in a wall beam. quiet messages for the next traveler. You hope they understand. Because in the end, safe houses aren't about comfort. They're about continuation. You walk in battered, bruised, hunted. You walk out whole enough to kill again, and that's the closest thing to home someone like you ever gets. Your mind is a battlefield long before you lift a blade. The body learns quickly how to crouch, climb, stab, vanish. But the brain, that takes longer. And in your line of work, staying alive often means learning to live with what you've done and what it's doing to you. Some assassins numb themselves with wine, others with prayer. You chose herbs. At first, it was simple poppy milk for pain, a little mandrake to sleep, pennyroyal to settle the nerves. But over time, the dosages blur. One pinch becomes two. You chew a root without thinking. You add herbs to wine like sugar to tea. Eventually, you can't remember what it feels like to be clear. The hallucinations start small. Shapes in the dark. Faces in the fire. A cat that stares too long. Then they grow. You see shadows watching from corners. Hear voices that might be memory or warning. One night you hold a conversation with a tree and leave convinced it gave you good advice. It probably didn't, but that's the price. The work frays you. You can't unhear the last words of a dying man. Can't unsee the child standing in the doorway when her father fell. You try to forget. You fail. The herbs help, and then they don't. Quirky detail. Number 1. Some assassins believe in spirit purges, burning a specific mix of sage, garlic, and beetle shells, and sitting in the smoke until they cry or vomit or both. You tried it once. You mostly just coughed, but you did dream of your mother that night. Quirky detail number 2. There's a drink called the widow's milk, a black syrup brewed by a guild alchemist. It gives you 5 hours of perfect calm, followed by 5 days of shaking hands. It's banned. You've used it twice. You'll never use it again. You begin to notice the patterns. Your thoughts race at dusk. Your fingers twitch before a job. You lose time, minutes, sometimes hours. You find yourself sharpening a blade that's already sharp, recounting coins you've counted twice, whispering names under your breath, some you recognize, some you don't. You're unraveling, slowly, quietly, but no one notices. Because you're good. You get the job done. You leave no trace. You even smile when required. The mask stays on. The cracks stay hidden. You begin to distrust yourself. Did you actually leave that door unlocked? Did you see someone at the tavern, or was that your reflection in a warped pane? Did your last target really beg for mercy? Or is your mind rewriting it? You start keeping a journal, just short entries. Time, place, target, outcome. You read them later like they were written by someone else, someone more certain, someone more sane. And then there are the dreams. They come every night now. Not always of blood, sometimes just waiting. An endless corridor. A staircase with no top. You climb, you descend, you never reach the end. One night you dream of a feast where every guest is someone you've killed. They raise goblets. They toast your name. You wake up sweating a knife in your hand, the pillow shredded. You need help, but where do assassins go for healing? You visit an apothecary in the woods. She doesn't ask what you do, she just knows. Her eyes are milky white, her voice cracked like old wood. She gives you a tonic and says, "Drink this only when you're ready to leave the path." You don't drink it, but you carry it, just in case. Historians rarely write about the mental toll of killing. They describe assassins as tools, shadows, assets. But you know better. You know the weight. You know the faces. You know that killing doesn't just remove a life, it plants something in its place. Something that grows. Something that talks to you when you're tired. You meet others like you. A man with a missing ear who flinches at bells. a woman who laughs too loudly at nothing, one old killer who hasn't taken a job in 10 years but still sharpens his knives every morning. He tells you he hasn't slept through the night since he was 20. You nod, you understand. You try coping mechanisms, meditation, silence, singing. You even try painting. You're terrible at it. But for a while, watching paint dry is better than watching blood. You find small comforts. A dog that follows you for 3 towns. A child's drawing pinned to an inn wall. A musician whose tune you can't forget. You gather these like pebbles in a pocket too small to stop the tide, but somehow they help you stay afloat. And slowly you begin to make rules. You don't kill in front of children. You never strike twice in the same town. You give your targets the dignity of being awake. No more poison in sleep. No more accidents. You need to see their eyes. Because if you ever lose that, you lose everything. Eventually, you learn to function again. Not fully, not happily, but clearly enough. You cut back on herbs. You sleep badly, but truly. The ghosts stay, but they sit quieter. You're still a killer, but you're not a puppet. Not anymore. You are not a spy. At least not in the romantic sense. You don't wear clever disguises. You don't seduce nobles for secrets, though you've seen it done. You don't smuggle coded letters in your boot and wink at border guards. That's spy work. Different line of business. Cleaner, prettier. Usually better dressed. But people think you're a spy. They hear shadow work and their minds leap to espionage secret pacts, rooftop meetings, messages tied to pigeons. And honestly, you let them believe it. Because being mistaken for a spy is better than being known as an assassin. Still, the professions overlap. You gather intel. You eavesdrop. You follow trails. You plant rumors. You once forged a noble's signature so perfectly that his own steward bowed to it. You've climbed into wine cellars, sat under council tables, pretended to be a mute page for 3 days just to hear who was bribing who. And for all that effort, you're still not invited to the nice parties. Spies get champagne and royal contracts. You get soup and a windowless room with a hole in the wall. Quirky detail number 1. One of the guild's information men disguised himself as a wandering barber. Everyone talks to the barber. He carried a tiny blade in the handle of his comb, but never once used it. He said gossip was deadlier. Quirky detail number 2. Some spies use perfumes as code. One kind of musk means follow me. Another means meeting changed. You once walked through a noble's parlor that smelled like a fruit stall in summer and accidentally triggered 4 different operatives to follow you. It was awkward and sweaty. You've crossed paths with spies, proper ones. Cloak and dagger types. Some work for kings, others for foreign courts. You've watched them work slipping from noble to servant to scribe, weaving lies like tapestries. You once trailed one for 3 days, then realized she was trailing you the whole time. You didn't speak, you just nodded. She nodded back. That was enough. The key difference between spies and assassins: spies keep the game going, assassins end it. Spies use leverage, secrets, seduction. Assassins use blades, poisons, gravity. You don't move the pieces, you remove them. But more and more, your contracts come with extras. Learn where the ledger is hidden, then end him. Make sure the scroll disappears after the steward dies. Take the captain, but leave a note implying treason. Suddenly your job isn't just killing, it's narrative. Your guild trains you in basics, coded writing, message crafting, tone, and script mimicry. You learn how to forge letters that start wars or stop them. You once wrote a love confession between 2 enemies just to delay a battle. It worked. For a week. They still hate each other, but now they're confused about it. Sometimes you envy the spies. They get long games. You get short blades. But then again, they never get to finish things. Always watching, always waiting, always one whisper away from ruin. You strike, you vanish, you're done. Until you're not. One spy name lost but face remembered taught you the best lie is 80% truth. You try it. You begin blending your tactics. You lie with your eyes, you flatter with intent. You pause before speaking because hesitation looks like thought. You steal books, not just coin. You read, you listen. You become dangerous in new ways. Historians still argue whether medieval assassins doubled as spies. Some claim no separation existed. That killing and knowing were two sides of the same blade. Others insist the roles were distinct. Spies whispered. Assassins bled. You think both are wrong? In your world, you do what's needed. Titles are luxuries. One client hires you to intercept a letter. No blood, no violence. Just sneak into the courier's house and retrieve it. You do. Inside, you find more than a message. You find evidence of betrayal, theft, and a second contract placed on your client's own wife. You could sell it. You could walk away. Instead, you burn it. You're not sure if that was kindness or strategy, but it felt good. Eventually, the spies begin treating you as an equal. You get nods in passing, anonymous notes left in safe houses. One offers to trade scrolls for silence. Another gifts you a cipher wheel carved into a bone coin. You still use it. It works. You learn that information is a weapon, sometimes stronger than steel. A rumor whispered in the right tavern does more than 10 daggers ever could. And once you choose not to kill. You're in a palace corridor, blade ready. The mark steps into view, young, scared, wearing 2 large boots and eyes too full of questions. You lower your hand. Instead, you leave behind a letter forged in his brother's hand, confessing to betrayal. The mark flees. The brother is arrested. No one dies, but everything changes. You're not sure what that makes you. Not a spy, not just a killer. Something the world doesn't have a name for. But that's fine. You don't need a name, just silence. And a little ink. There's no retirement plan. You never expected one. No pension, no cottage in the hills, no rocking chair beside the fire where you regale grandchildren with stories that must never be told. This life doesn't end in peace. It ends in disappearance or disaster. And you've seen both. Some assassins simply vanish. One day they're slipping into the shadows behind a brothel. The next, nothing, no trace, no rumor, not even a whisper. Maybe they fled. Maybe they were caught. Maybe they just walked into the sea and let the tide sort it out. Others hang on too long. You've watched a killer bleed out on a tavern floor trying to fight with hands that shook too much to hold a blade. You've seen one caught trying to steal bread, not because he was poor, but because his memory had frayed so thin he forgot how to act like anyone else. He begged the guards for a name. They gave him a number instead. So you prepare, not for a glorious exit, there's no such thing in your trade, but for a quiet one. You set aside coin. You memorize escape routes not tied to contracts. You build an identity so boring, so forgettable that even you can't stand it. Benoit the beekeeper. You hate bees, but no one suspects Benoit of anything except smelling faintly of wax. You build a life around that idea. A cabin, a field, a single chair. You even try beekeeping once. You're stung 3 times and spend the night sulking. But it grounds you. It reminds you that survival isn't the same as living. Quirky detail number 1. Some assassins retire to monasteries not out of piety, but because monastic life offers routine silence and cover. You visited one once. The abbot met your eyes and didn't flinch. Later, you found a hidden blade in the lectern. You nodded. He nodded. That was that. Quirky detail number 2. One killer built a tavern in the mountains where only other assassins drink. No one speaks above a whisper. No one brings weapons inside. The stew is terrible, the wine is worse. But the quiet, it's priceless. You begin to think, maybe you could stop. Just walk away. No more contracts, no more masks, just a name, a place, a season that isn't about shadows. But it's never that simple. Because even if you stop killing, the world doesn't forget. People remember favors, grudges, blood. You helped a noble once. He sends a messenger every spring just to make sure you're still available. You send back honey in a jar and no message. He stops asking. Others are less polite. One day a writer appears. She's young, nervous, carries a note in a wax-sealed tube. It's from a man you once spared. He needs your help. Not to kill, but to protect. You say no. 3 days later, his body washes up on a riverbank. You attend the funeral from a distance. No one recognizes you. And then there are the apprentices. You didn't mean to train anyone, but someone watches you, learns from you. A young thief. Quick fingers, quick mind. He starts following you. You warn him off. He doesn't listen. Eventually you teach him, not everything, just enough to not die. And for a while it feels like something close to legacy. You almost believe it. Until he takes a job behind your back. He botches it, and you have to clean it up. You bury him near the woods. No name, just stones. After that, you stop thinking about legacy. Historians don't write about what happens after. The death, the fade, the aching joints. The days when no one knocks and the silence feels too deep. They focus on the glamour, the strike, the politics, never the emptiness. You keep the dagger, just one, tucked away, polished weekly. Not because you want to use it, but because it's yours, a part of you. Like the scar behind your ear or the memory of the first person you killed. These things don't fade. Eventually the world forgets you. New killers rise. New wars start. You watch them from afar. A name floats through a rumor one you used 20 years ago. It doesn't belong to you anymore. And then one day, someone does knock. A child, wide-eyed, shivering, holding a letter in trembling hands. You open it. Inside your old symbol. A crow in flight, no name, just a phrase. It's time. You stare at it for a long while. Then quietly you close the door. You sit down, you light a candle. And for the first time in years, you consider picking up the blade again. Just once more. Because in your world, retirement isn't an ending. It's just a slower walk into the dark. Stories lie. They speak of you in whispers in tavern corners by firelight. They paint you taller, darker, more handsome, or hideous than you ever were. They call you the Phantom, the Widowmaker, the Blade of Ash. None of those names are yours. You never had a name that stuck, not one that wasn't burned off by time and smoke. But the stories remain. They say you move through walls. That you once killed a duke in his dreams. That you slit a queen's throat during a waltz and vanished before the music stopped. One version claims you turned into a bird. Another says you were born with no face. You don't correct any of it. Why would you let the stories build their castles of nonsense? The more they grow, the less they point to you. Truth and myth part ways long ago. But sometimes the lies cut deep. You once overheard a bard sing about a noble assassin who only killed the wicked, who left feathers as tokens, who wept for every soul he took. You've never wept. You have killed good people. Not often, not proudly, but enough. And feathers, please. Once you left a turkey feather behind by accident. The target was a butcher. It fell out of your coat. The next day, a rumor spread that you were an angel of vengeance. You laughed so hard you nearly choked on your bread. Quirky detail number 1. There's an entire play based on you, well, a version of you. You're portrayed by a former soldier who wears too much eyeliner and recites his lines while standing on tables. In the final act, you marry a duchess and become king. You've seen it twice. It's awful. You secretly love it. Quirky detail number 2. A merchant began selling charms blessed by the ghost of the knife. It's a small bone wrapped in red thread. He claims it wards off betrayal. You bought one. It didn't work. The myth spreads without you. You hear of copycats. Young fools who dress in black smear soot on their faces and try to mimic your work. Most of them die. A few succeed briefly. One even gets close to your reputation. You meet him once by accident in a market square. He smiles. You don't. Later you find out he was hanged after failing a job you would have refused. You don't celebrate. You just keep walking. You've begun to notice how the world wants legends. It needs them to feel safer or braver or distracted. And so it shapes people like you into stories digestible, dramatic, distant. You become a character they can cheer or fear but never fully understand. Historians do this too. They write you as a shadowy agent, a necessary evil, a footnote in the tale of greater men. They miss the point. They count kills, not silences. They record dates, not decisions. No one writes about the night you didn't strike, or the one you waited 3 days to avoid a child being caught in the crossfire. No one writes that you were tired, that you still are. You once visited a village where a woman swore she saw the ghost assassin as a boy, said you fed her cat and left a flower in her window. That never happened, but she believed it. And in her story, you were kind. You didn't argue. You just nodded. Why take that away from her? Maybe you've become two people. There's the one who walks in silence, watches from shadows, ends lives. And then there's the one in the story's part phantom, part protector. You're not sure which one is heavier. You begin to leave false traces, just to see what people will do with them. A coin placed under a bishop's pillow, a red ribbon tied to a tree, a poem scratched into stone. None of it true. All of it taken as gospel by someone. You wonder how many legends are born that way. One day a child approaches you. You're in disguise. He doesn't know your face. He just tells you he wants to be like the Blade Man. You ask why? He says because he always wins. You pause. Then you kneel and say, no, he just never stays long enough to lose. He doesn't understand. That's fine. He's still young, but you carry that moment with you. Because it reminds you that stories are not about truth. They're about what people need to believe. And maybe there's some mercy in that. So you walk the line between man and myth. You let the tales grow wild. You nod when people repeat your deeds back to you all twisted and grand. You leave one final sign, a symbol carved on a stone gate, the mark only you would recognize. Because someday someone will find it and wonder. And maybe that's the best legacy you can hope for. A question carved into history. You don't remember the first face? You've tried. Over the years, you've conjured images, fragments, eyes wide in surprise, lips parted to speak, but never quite forming words. But it's all dust. What sticks more vividly is the sound your boot made as you stepped back after the strike. The breath you held. The moment that nothing happened and then everything did. And that's how it ends too. No grand final kill. No dramatic rooftop chase. No last-second escape by moonlight. Just stillness. You didn't plan it this way. In fact, you didn't plan it at all. It happened between one breath and the next, somewhere along a mountain path carrying nothing but a pack, a walking stick, and that one familiar blade hidden beneath your belt. You'd gone up there to scout or hide, or perhaps simply to disappear. You told no one, left no mark. The path was steep, the sky overcast, the silence peaceful. You walked until the light failed. Then you stopped walking. You found a cave. Dry, quiet. The kind where the world doesn't come looking. You made a fire, you sat with it. You stayed. The next morning you woke up and did nothing. No note under a door, no target, no message in wax. And still the world turned. Quirky detail number 1. You kept a tally once, not of kills. Of lives spared? A merchant who stepped aside at the wrong moment. A servant who opened a door too early. A boy who stumbled in your path with a tray of wine. You didn't strike. You let them go. You counted them. They mattered more. Quirky detail. Number 2. Deep in your pack among tools and powders and relics is a book. Blank save for the first page. It reads, I was here. You never wrote another word. That one sentence was enough. Historians won't know this part. They'll mark your final act as a mystery. No body found, no trail. Some will claim you faked your death. Others will swear you were finally killed. A few will insist you never existed at all, that you were a ghost, a tale, a shadow passed from voice to voice. Let them. The guild won't chase. They already know. There's a rule among your kind: when someone walks away quietly enough, you leave them be. You earned that. So you sit. You think. You eat when hungry, sleep when tired. You tend a fire. You let birdsong mark your days. You mend your own clothes with crooked stitches and try unsuccessfully to keep moss from growing on your boots. You do not dream often, but when you do, they're gentle dreams of sunlight on stone, of warm bread in silent rooms, of names you never gave anyone whispered back to you in voices not quite real. Sometimes on distant wind you hear bells, other times rain, but never footsteps. You are alone, entirely, and you are finally safe. Let that image settle. The quiet cave, the ember glow, the fire crackling soft against the stone as you sit wrapped in a wool cloak worn thin with time. The tools of death, once so familiar, now tucked away beneath folded cloth untouched. You breathe not with fear, not with anticipation, but simply because you can. No eyes watching, no contracts to keep, no names to remember. Just the wind slipping past the rocks carrying the scent of pine and cold earth. The quiet is deep here, not just outside, but inside too. It wraps around your chest like a blanket. You didn't expect this, you never planned for peace, but here it is. Plain, steady, a life in its own rhythm. You close your eyes, you listen. A drip of water from the cave ceiling. A single owl in the distance. Your own heart slower than you remember, softer. And perhaps in the far corner of your mind a question rises not out of doubt, but curiosity. Was it enough? Not the kills, not the coins, but the choices. The moments of restraint. The nights you walked away. The people who still breathe because you paused. Perhaps that is the legacy you left behind. No statues, no songs, just a trail of silence in a noisy world. And here at last the silence welcomes you. I'll be here with another story for you tomorrow night.